I never believed in ghosts until that night in Fes. The ancient Medina had been everything I'd hoped for, a labyrinth of narrow alleyways bathed in golden light, air heavy with spices and the calls of merchants. After a day of getting wonderfully lost among the stalls of the souks, I was grateful to return to my hostel tucked away in a renovated RIAD near Bab Bujloud, the famous Blue Gate. RIAD Al-Andalus wasn't luxurious, but with its traditional mosaic tiles and central courtyard fountain, it had charm that more than made up for the lack of modern amenities. Plus, at €20 a night, I couldn't complain. I'd spent 3 days exploring Fes, but that particular evening, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. I decided to skip dinner with Felix and Clara, the friendly German couple I'd met in my shared room, opting instead for an early night. "You sure, Gabriel?" Felix had asked, concern evident in his eyes. "The night market near Al-Karawayan is supposed to be amazing." I shook my head, collapsing onto my thin mattress. "Maybe tomorrow. I think I need to recharge." Clara smiled understanding. "Rest well," she said, and they disappeared into the night. The hostel emptied quickly. Even Youssef, the elderly night manager, mentioned he needed to step out for an hour, a family emergency. He handed me a spare key to the front door in case I needed anything. "The Medina is safe, but please, keep our door locked until I return," he said, his weathered face solemn. I promised I would and retreated to my room, grateful for the rare solitude in a hostel setting. After a quick shower in the shared bathroom, I collapsed onto my bed, the sounds of distant street vendors and motorbikes fading as sleep took me. I jolted awake at 2:17 a.m. The hostel was deathly quiet, not even the usual sounds of other travelers shifting in their sleep. The silence was absolute, pressing against my ears like cotton wool. My phone showed no signal, unusual even for the Medina. That's when I noticed the temperature. Despite the September heat, the room had become freezing cold. My breath misted before me. Then, a door slammed somewhere in the hostel. My heart lurched. "Felix? Clara?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the darkness. No response. Then, another door, closer this time. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, illuminating the empty beds where Felix and Clara should have been. Their backpacks remained, but they were nowhere in sight. The rational part of my brain suggested they might still be out enjoying the night, but at 2 a.m., with all their belongings left behind? The door to my own room slammed shut, making me jump. The handle began to turn slowly, methodically. I froze, unable to move or scream as the door creaked open to reveal nothing. An empty hallway. But as I focused on the darkness beyond, I began to make out handprints, small, child-sized handprints, appearing on the wall outside my room. One after another, as if someone invisible was climbing the wall, moving horizontally across it like a spider. The prints were wet, glistening in my phone's light. They weren't water. They were blood. My legs finally responded, and I scrambled from the bed, pressing myself against the far wall. The handprints stopped appearing just outside my door. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping from the ceiling. Tap, tap, tap. Fuzz. Tap, tap, tap. I raised my phone's light upward, illuminating the ornate plaster ceiling. Nothing seemed amiss until I noticed a small dark spot forming directly above me. A drop of liquid fell, landing on my forearm. Blood. I stifled a scream and bolted for the door, desperate to escape. The hallway was pitch black, my phone the only source of light. The once charming RIAD now felt like a trap, with its twisting corridors and multiple staircases. As I turned a corner, my light fell upon a small figure standing at the end of the hall. A child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, wearing traditional Moroccan clothes that might have once been colorful but now appeared soaked in dark liquid. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Are you lost?" The child didn't respond but slowly raised their head. Where eyes should have been were only dark, empty sockets, weeping blood down pale cheeks. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone. The light spun wildly as it clattered on the tile floor, briefly illuminating more children appearing from doorways, from behind furniture, all with the same eyeless faces, all reaching toward me with small, blood-soaked hands. By some miracle, I found my way to the main courtyard. Moonlight filtered down through the open roof, casting the mosaic tiles in an ethereal blue glow. The fountain, which had burbled pleasantly during the day, now ran red, the metallic scent of blood filling the air. Surrounding the fountain were Felix and Clara, standing perfectly still, facing the water. Relief flooded through me. Thank God. We need to leave now. I grabbed Felix's arm, but he remained motionless. When he turned, his face was a mask of horror. His eyes were gone, excavated from his skull, and blood streamed down his cheeks. They take the eyes first, he whispered, his voice not his own, higher, like a child's. They need them to see the way home. Clara turned too, revealing the same gruesome mutilation. The children were walled up alive when they built this place, she said in that same unsettling voice. 7 of them. 1 for each cornerstone. An offering, Felix continued. For strength. For permanence. But now they're hungry again, they said in unison. The main door was just across the courtyard. I sprinted for it, fumbling with the key Yusef had given me. Behind me, I could hear the wet patter of small feet on tile, closing in. The lock finally clicked, and I burst out into the alley, gasping in the cool night air. I ran blindly through the Medina, not slowing until I reached the crowded night market near Al-Karouan. I reported everything to the police at first light, but they found nothing unusual at Riyadh Al-Andalus. Felix and Clara were gone, as was any trace of blood. Yusef denied giving me any key, claiming he never left his post that night, and insisted I had returned to the hostel just before dawn, alone and babbling nonsense. My backpack and passport were recovered from the room I'd stayed in, but my phone was never found. Sometimes I'm grateful for that. I don't want to see what might have been captured in those final moments at the RIAD. I left Morocco that same day. 3 months later, I received an email from a Moroccan historian who'd heard about my experience through a police contact. The site of Riyadh Al-Andalus, he explained, had once been a tanner's workshop in the 16th century. During renovations in the 1970s, workers discovered the skeletal remains of 7 children sealed within the walls. According to local legend, the master tanner had sacrificed the children, taking their eyes while they still lived, to appease jinn who had cursed his business. The remains were quietly removed and buried, the discovery hushed up to avoid frightening tourists. The historian's final paragraph still haunts me. In our stories, the eyeless seek what was taken from them. They are drawn to travelers, those who have seen much of the world, hoping to claim new eyes for themselves. If you were permitted to leave, Gabriel, it was not mercy. It was purpose. They chose you to share their story, to bring new guests to their door. In your dreams, can you still hear them whispering? They say the children are waiting for you to come home. Sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I do hear them. And I wonder how many travelers have read reviews of charming, affordable Riyadh Al-Andalus since my visit, drawn by descriptions I now suspect were never written by human hands. I wonder how many have checked in but never truly checked out. The red door at Riyadh NOOR. I never should have tried that door. I still see it in my dreams, that blood-red wood with strange symbols carved into it, standing at the end of a dim corridor in a Marrakesh hostel. Sometimes I wake up convinced it's appeared on my bedroom wall, watching me while I sleep. It started 3 weeks ago. I'm a photographer from Bristol, and I'd finally saved enough for my dream trip to Morocco. After haggling with a taxi driver who clearly recognized a tourist's desperation, I found myself at the entrance to the ancient Medina of Marrakesh. My hostel, Riyadh NOOR, was supposedly only a 15-minute walk through the Medina. 2 hours later, phone battery dead and sweat soaking my shirt, I finally found the unmarked wooden door with a small brass plaque. It swung open before I could knock, revealing an older Moroccan man with crinkled eyes and a neat white beard. "Ah, you must be James," he said in perfect English. "Welcome to RIAD NOOR. I am Hamid, the caretaker." The courtyard inside was stunning, a complete contrast to the dusty, chaotic alleyways outside. A small fountain bubbled at the center, surrounded by intricate mosaic tiles and potted palms. For stories of rooms rose around us, their wooden balconies ornately carved. "You are in the Sahara room, top floor," Hamid said, handing me an antique key with a red tassel. "Last door on the right. Do not open the red door at the end of the corridor. It is forbidden." I laughed nervously. "What red door?" His smile never wavered. "You will see. It is storage only. Very old things inside. Not for guests." My room was simple but beautiful. After dropping my backpack, I stepped into the corridor to find the bathroom, and that's when I saw it. At the far end stood a door painted the color of dried blood, with black iron studs and symbols I'd never seen before. It looked ancient, as if the RIAD had been built around it, not the other way around. As I stared, I heard what sounded like whispering from behind it. At dinner, I met the only other guests, a French couple who barely spoke English and an American woman named Isla studying traditional weaving. The meal was incredible, but something felt off. Isla mentioned there had been more guests the previous day, a German couple and a Canadian man. They took a desert tour, Hamid explained quickly. 3 days in Merzouga. Very popular. That night, I heard footsteps in the corridor, light and quick, passing my door and heading toward the red door. Against my better judgment, I looked out. A small figure stood at the forbidden door, child-sized but somehow wrong in its proportions. It turned toward me, face obscured by shadow, and beckoned with one crooked finger before slipping through the door, which opened just enough to admit it. I told myself it was a dream, but the next morning, I couldn't resist checking the door. It was locked. "I told you, it is forbidden," Hamid's voice startled me from behind. His tone remained pleasant, but his eyes had hardened. At breakfast, Isla was missing. "She left early for a workshop," Hamid said when I asked. "She didn't mention any workshop," I frowned. Hamid shrugged. "Young people are often impulsive." I spent the day photographing the Medina, but returned to find the French couple gone too, a family emergency, according to Hamid. I was now alone in the RIAD. That night, the whispers grew louder, not just behind the red door, but seeping through the walls themselves. Voices speaking urgently in dozens of languages I couldn't identify. Then came the footsteps again, many sets this time. I looked out to see the corridor filled with transparent figures in clothing from different eras, all moving toward the red door, which now stood open, revealing not a room but a swirling darkness. Among them was Isla, her eyes hollow, her smile unnaturally wide. "Join us, James," she called, her voice echoing strangely. "The door opens to those who are curious. It's been waiting for you." I found myself walking toward her, drawn by a terrible fascination. The darkness beyond the door seemed to pulse with life. As my foot crossed some invisible line, the spell broke. I stumbled back. "No," I gasped. "I can't." Isla's face contorted with rage. "You've seen too much. The door doesn't offer twice." She lunged at me with impossible speed, her fingers elongating into claws. I ran, slamming my room door as she crashed against it. The wood splintered but held while I grabbed my backpack. The pounding stopped suddenly. "It's too late for running, Mr. Collins," came Hamid's voice, calm as ever. "The red door has chosen you." I forced open my window and jumped to the neighboring RIAD's roof, scrambled down a drain pipe, and ran through the Medina until I reached the modern city and found a taxi to the airport. Back home in Bristol, I discovered something in my hastily packed bag, a small red tassel with a note. "The red door exists in many places, for those with eyes to see. We will be waiting." Last night, I dreamt of a red door appearing on my bedroom wall. This morning, I noticed a faint crimson stain spreading across my wallpaper, the exact size and shape of a door. I'm writing this as a warning. If you ever visit Marrakesh and find yourself at RIAD NOOR, remember, do not open the red door. And whatever you do, don't look when something knocks from the other side. I should have listened to the old man at the market. The dead have eyes in every stone of Egypt, he'd warned as I bought the small obsidian scarab. But I was Noah Brooks, 26, fearless adventurer from Chicago. At least that's how I branded my travel blog. The first sign something was wrong came the moment I checked into Pharaoh's Haven Hostel, just blocks from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The receptionist, a young woman with kohl-rimmed eyes, kept staring at my chest where the scarab hung on a leather cord. "Where did you get this?" she asked, fingertips hovering above it without touching. "Khan el-Khalili Market. $15. Too much." She withdrew her hand like I'd tried to bite it. "Room 13 is ready for you." 13? Seriously? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's your lucky number today." The hostel had once been a colonial mansion, with high ceilings and ornate woodwork that had seen better days. My room was small but private, a luxury I'd splurged on after 3 weeks of shared dorms across North Africa. The oddity was the wall opposite my bed. Someone had painted a life-sized figure of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification. Its black silhouette stretched from floor to ceiling, with eyes inlaid with what looked like real gold that caught the light when the ceiling fan rotated. I snapped a photo for my blog. Talk about authentic Egyptian decor. That night, I woke to scratching sounds, like nails on stone. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. The sound came from inside the walls, moving in rhythmic patterns, almost like hieroglyphs being carved in real time. The eyes of Anubis glinted in the darkness. They hadn't caught my attention earlier, but now I realized they were positioned to stare directly at the bed. I'm not easily spooked, but something felt wrong. I switched on my phone's flashlight and examined the painting. The eyes weren't paint at all, but actual holes in the wall, lined with some reflective material. When I peered closer, I could have sworn I saw movement in the darkness beyond. "Hello," I whispered, feeling ridiculous. "Anyone there?" A soft exhale answered me, not from the holes, but from the corner of my room. I whirled around. Nothing. When I looked back at Anubis, his arm had moved. The painted limb was now outstretched, fingers splayed as if reaching for something. For me. I blinked hard and the image reset. The arm was back in its original position. Sleep deprivation, I told myself. Jet lag playing tricks. I popped a melatonin and forced myself back to sleep. I dreamt of endless corridors lined with animal-headed statues, all turning to watch as I passed. At the end stood a scale with a feather on one side, my heart on the other. Morning came as a relief. Over breakfast on the hostel's rooftop terrace, I met Elijah, another American backpacking through Egypt before starting medical school in Boston. "Room 13? Man, they put you in the death room," he laughed when I mentioned my accommodations. "The what?" "Just a stupid story. The staff won't talk about it, but this German guy told me a girl died in there last year. Something about thinking the wall was talking to her. Jumped off the balcony." I forced a laugh. Guess she didn't have the heart for Egypt. "Funny you mention hearts." Elijah leaned closer. "Ancient Egyptians believed your heart was judged after death. Too heavy with sin, and Anubis fed it to Amit the devourer." My dream flashed back. The scale, the feather. "Anyway," Elijah continued, "wanna hit the museum today?" I agreed, desperately needing distraction. The Egyptian museum was spectacular, if overwhelming. Room after room of artifacts, but I kept finding myself drawn to the funeral displays, canopic jars that once held organs, death masks, texts from the Book of the Dead. In the mummy room I felt dizzy. The scarab against my chest turned ice cold, then burning hot. The placards beside the preserved bodies began swimming before my eyes, the hieroglyphs rearranging into messages I somehow understood. "You wear what is ours. The gateway is open. Your heart is heavy. I stumbled outside, leaving Elijah behind. Back at the hostel, I collapsed onto my bed, fever burning through me. The scratching in the walls had returned, louder now, more insistent. Anubis watched from the wall, but the painting had changed again. Now his hand clutched an ankh, the symbol of life, and the hieroglyphs around him were clearer, forming phrases I could somehow read. The unworthy have stolen from the dead. The scarab opens the way between worlds. Judgment comes at midnight. As darkness fell, I texted Elijah, "Something's wrong. Room 13. Please come." No reply. At 11:30 p.m., a knock finally came. I stumbled to the door, weak with relief. It wasn't Elijah. The receptionist stood there, eyes now fully black, with 3 maintenance workers behind her. All stared at my scarab. "It's time for your heart to be weighed," she said in a voice that echoed impossibly. "You have taken what doesn't belong to you." I slammed the door and wedged a chair beneath the handle, mind racing. The scratching in the walls had become a thunderous assault, like thousands of beetles trying to break through. The Anubis painting was fully animated now, the jackal head turning to follow me. The golden eyes had widened to the size of saucers, a soft light emanating from whatever lay beyond. My phone buzzed. "Elijah, on my way." Hang tight. Too late. The door splintered as the workers broke through. I retreated to the balcony as they advanced, their movements jerky, inhuman, eyes gleaming gold like the ones on the wall. "Your heart is heavy with greed," the receptionist intoned. "You took the sacred scarab of passage, the key between life and death. It was for sale." I protested. "In a tourist market. The thief who sold it is already judged." She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "Now it's your turn." They lunged. I climbed onto the balcony railing, 13 stories above the Cairo streets. Below, I saw Elijah arriving, looking up in horror. Above, I heard the beating of massive wings. In that moment, I understood my choice: jump to certain death, or face judgment from whatever waited on the other side of those golden eyes. I tore the scarab from my neck and hurled it at the receptionist. "Take it back. I don't want it." Time seemed to slow. The scarab hung in the air, then reversed direction, flying back toward me like it was pulled by an invisible thread. It struck my chest and burned through my shirt, through skin, through bone, burrowing directly into my heart. I fell backward off the balcony, the night air rushing past. I never hit the ground. Massive wings enveloped me mid-fall, carrying me upward, not toward heaven, but toward the golden eyes that had widened to become a portal in the side of the building. I caught one last glimpse of Elijah's upturned face before I was pulled through, into the court of Anubis, where the scales awaited my heart. They say American tourists vanish in Egypt all the time. If you're reading this and you visit Cairo, stay away from room 13 at Pharaoh's Haven. Don't buy obsidian scarabs, no matter how authentic they seem. And if you see a painting with golden eyes that seem to follow you, run. They're not eyes at all, but windows. Windows through which the ancient gods are watching, waiting for hearts heavy enough to feed their hunger. In the heart of Bali's bustling Legian district stood the Sunset Paradise Hostel, a pastel-colored 3-story building that looked like it belonged on an Instagram feed rather than in a horror story. Oliver Hayes, a 27-year-old marketing executive from Manchester, had chosen it precisely for its perfect blend of social atmosphere and proximity to the beach, a quintessential accommodation for any UK backpacker looking to stretch their pounds into rupiah. The hostel boasted everything a traveler could want: a rooftop bar with sunset views, a small but refreshing pool, and dorms that promised both affordability and comfort. Oliver had arrived late, nearly midnight, after a delayed flight from Kuala Lumpur and a taxi ride that seemed to circle the same streets 3 times before finding the narrow alley where Sunset Paradise was nestled. "Sorry, mate, we've had to move you to a private room," the receptionist said, his English impeccable but tinged with local accent. "We had some maintenance issues in the dorms. You'll be in room 27. Top floor all the way at the end." Oliver didn't protest. After 20 hours of travel, a private room sounded like winning the lottery. "What happened to the dorm?" he asked, curiosity momentarily overcoming exhaustion. The receptionist's smile flickered. "Plumbing. Always plumbing in these old buildings. Don't worry, your room is perfect. Very quiet." Room 27 was at the far end of a long corridor that smelled faintly of incense and mold, that particular tropical blend that whispered of monsoons and humidity. The room itself was simple: a double bed with white sheets, a small desk, a fan on the ceiling, and a bathroom that was little more than a toilet, sink, and shower crammed into a space the size of a closet. But what caught Oliver's attention was the window, large and bare, overlooking not the street or the beach, but a small courtyard dominated by an ancient banyan tree whose twisted limbs seemed to reach toward the glass like gnarled fingers. In the darkness, illuminated only by a single flickering light, it looked almost alive. Too tired to care, Oliver collapsed onto the bed and fell into a heavy sleep. He woke at 3:17 a.m. according to his phone, that strange hour when the world feels suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Something had pulled him from sleep, a sound that his brain couldn't quite identify but had registered as wrong. As he lay there, trying to pinpoint what had disturbed him, he heard it again. It came from the bathroom. Rhythmic, deliberate, like someone testing the wall for weak spots. Oliver sat up, his heart suddenly pounding. "Hello," he called, immediately feeling foolish. Of course no one was in his tiny bathroom. The tapping stopped. Then came the whispering. It wasn't English, not Balinese either, at least not any Balinese he'd heard in the phrasebook he'd studied on the plane. It was something older, the syllables slithering like snakes against the walls. "Just the pipes," he told himself, though the rational part of his brain rejected this explanation immediately. Pipes didn't whisper names. Pipes didn't say, "Oliver," in voices that sounded like rustling leaves. He forced himself to stand, to walk the 3 steps to the bathroom door. With a deep breath, he pushed it open. Empty. Just as it should be. But the mirror above the sink showed more than his reflection. For just a moment, a flash so quick he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it, he saw a figure standing behind him. A woman with long dark hair hanging over her face, her skin mottled with what looked like bruises or decay. Oliver spun around. Nothing. When he turned back to the mirror, the reflection was normal again. Just his pale face, eyes wide with the beginning edges of fear. That's when the tapping started again, not from the bathroom this time, but from the window. The one overlooking the banyan tree. Oliver moved to the window, pulled aside the thin curtain. The courtyard below was empty, but the banyan tree wasn't as it had been before. Its branches seemed to have shifted, reaching closer to his window, and in the shadows cast by the single courtyard light, he could swear he saw figures moving among the roots, twisted human shapes that flowed like water around the ancient trunk. He let the curtain fall and stepped back. His phone buzzed. A text message at 3:23 a.m. Unknown number, room 27 is not for guests. Another buzz. Unknown number, they died there. Oliver's hands trembled as he typed, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly, "Ask about the British girl." A knock at his door made him jump so violently he dropped his phone. It skidded under the bed. "Hello," called a voice, British, female, young. "Is anyone in there? I need help." Oliver approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "Please," the voice sounded desperate now. "I'm lost. They said there was someone from the UK in this room who could help me." Against his better judgment, Oliver opened the door. The corridor was empty, but a trail of wet footprints led from his door to the stairwell, small, bare feet that left dark marks on the wooden floor. Not water. Something thicker. The whispers started again, from everywhere and nowhere. Oliver slammed the door shut and wedged the desk chair under the handle. His breath came in short gasps as he fumbled under the bed for his phone. He needed to call someone, anyone. His fingers touched something cold and metallic. Not his phone, but a thin chain with a pendant, a small silver compass. Engraved on the back were the initials GL and a date just 6 months earlier. The tapping at his window became more insistent, and when he looked up, the glass was covered with handprints, dozens of them, small and large, pressing against the pane from the outside. But his room was on the 3rd floor. Oliver's phone screen lit up from where it lay, partially visible beneath the bed. A new message. Unknown number, Georgia never left. The name hit him like a physical blow. 6 months ago, the British news had been briefly captivated by the disappearance of a backpacker in Bali, Georgia Lawson, 23, last seen at a hostel in LEGIAN. Her case had faded from the headlines after a week of speculation, replaced by newer tragedies. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. "I didn't know," Oliver whispered to the empty room. "I swear I didn't know this was your room." The whispers grew louder, and now he could make out words in English interspersed with that ancient language. "Witness, remember, tell them." The handprints on the window began to slide downward, as if the owners were being dragged away. The tapping stopped. In the sudden silence, Oliver heard clearly, "They're coming back." A new noise rose from beneath him, the sound of many footsteps ascending the stairs, moving with purpose toward room 27. In that moment, Oliver understood with perfect clarity that Georgia Lawson wasn't the one he needed to fear. She was trying to warn him. Whatever had happened to her in room 27 was about to happen again. As the footsteps reached his floor and began moving down the corridor, Oliver did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed Georgia's compass, flung open the window, and looked at the twisted banyan tree that now seemed to be reaching for him, offering its branches like arms. Behind him, the desk chair began to scrape across the floor as something pushed against the door. Oliver Hayes had a choice to make. And as the first light of dawn began to bleach the horizon, the guests at Sunset Paradise Hostel would wake to find room 27 empty once again, with only wet footprints leading to the window and the ancient banyan tree below, its branches swaying gently though there was no wind. I never planned to stay at Moonlight Hostel in Prague. My original booking fell through at the last minute, and with the summer tourist season in full swing, options were scarce. The historic building sat on a narrow cobblestone street, just far enough from Charles Bridge to seem like a local secret rather than a tourist trap. "You're lucky," said Felix, the desk clerk with tired eyes and a forced smile. "We have one bed left in our shared dormitory." His accent was thick but his English perfect. Too perfect. Like he'd been repeating the same phrases to travelers for years. "Room 44, he said, sliding the key across the worn wooden counter. "Top floor, last door on the right." I noticed his hand trembling slightly as he pulled it back. When our eyes met, he quickly looked down at his computer. "Is everything okay with the room?" I asked. "Of course," he replied too quickly. "It's just, it gets a bit warm up there. Summer heat rises, you understand." The building had that distinctive European charm, centuries-old stone walls, creaking wooden floors, and narrow corridors that twisted unexpectedly. No elevator, of course. By the time I reached the 4th floor, my backpack felt twice as heavy, and sweat dripped down my spine despite the evening chill. Room 44 was indeed at the end of the hallway, set apart from the others. As I approached, I noticed something odd. While all the other doors were painted vibrant colors with room numbers in brass, room 44's door was matte black with the number etched deeply into the wood, as if carved with a knife. Inside, the dormitory had 6 beds, but only 2 showed signs of occupancy, mine and one other with a small leather backpack on it. The windows were tall but narrow, offering a sliver view of Prague Castle illuminated against the night sky. I chose the bed farthest from the door and closest to the window. Better airflow, I thought. At midnight, my roommate arrived. Gabriel was Belgian, tall and rail-thin, with darting eyes that never quite met mine. "You're American," he said. "Not a question." First time in Prague? I nodded. Listen carefully, Gabriel whispered, suddenly sitting on my bed. His voice dropped so low I had to lean in. Something isn't right with this room. The others, they disappeared. What others? I arrived 3 days ago. There were 4 others staying here, 2 British girls, Clara and Adriana, and a couple, Alex and Sarah. Each night, one of them vanished. I laughed nervously. They probably just checked out, or hooked up and stayed somewhere else. Their belongings remained, Gabriel insisted. Then those disappeared too. When I asked Felix at reception, he claimed they had all checked out early. But I saw Clara's passport under her pillow before she vanished. Who leaves without their passport? A cold feeling settled in my stomach, but I shrugged it off. Maybe the hostel staff moved their things when they didn't return? Gabriel's eyes widened. The staff never comes up here. Haven't you noticed? No cleaning, nothing. He was right. The bathroom was suspiciously untouched, towels hanging exactly where they had been when I arrived. There's more, Gabriel continued. I looked up reviews for this place online. Every few months, there's a review that gets deleted within hours. Someone warning about room 44. The old building creaked around us, and I suddenly felt very aware of how isolated we were at the top floor. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said firmly. I'm leaving tonight, Gabriel replied, gathering his things. You should too. But I was exhausted from travel, and the thought of finding new accommodation after midnight seemed worse than whatever paranoia Gabriel was experiencing. I'll be fine for one night, I insisted. Gabriel paused at the door. If you stay, don't sleep. And whatever you hear, don't open the door unless you're absolutely certain it's me. After he left, the silence was oppressive. I tried to distract myself with my phone, but the Wi-Fi was suddenly non-existent and my data wouldn't connect. Outside, Prague's beautiful skyline seemed too distant, as if the window had somehow stretched further away. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, soft scratching at the door, so faint I might have imagined it. Then a voice. Gabriel? Are you there? I forgot my key. It was a woman's voice, light and slightly accented. British. Clara? I'm locked out. Please open the door. My heart pounded. Claire, the girl Gabriel said had disappeared. The handle turned slightly, then stopped. More scratching. I see your light. I know you're in there. Her voice changed, becoming lower, harsher. The scratching intensified, turning into a steady scraping sound. I sat frozen on my bed, watching the black door. The sound stopped abruptly. Then came a new voice, Felix from reception. Sir, we have an emergency. Please open your door immediately. It sounded exactly like him, but Gabriel's warning echoed in my mind. I stayed silent. There's a fire. You must evacuate now. His voice was calm. Too calm for a fire emergency. When I didn't respond, the voice changed again. Alex? Sarah? Gabriel? Adriana? It cycled through names as if testing which might make me react. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me, and the window frosted over from the inside, cutting off my view of the outside world. The scratching returned, this time from inside the walls. From all sides simultaneously. I heard movement in the ceiling above me, shuffling footsteps that couldn't possibly belong to anyone human given the building's structure. Just before dawn, everything stopped. Silence returned. The frost on the window melted away, and warm summer air seeped back into the room. When morning light flooded through the window, I grabbed my backpack and ran downstairs without looking back. At reception, a young woman I hadn't seen before greeted me cheerfully. Checking out? How was your stay? Where's Felix? I demanded. Her brow furrowed. Felix? We don't have anyone by that name working here. The man at reception yesterday. Dark hair, late 20s. She shook her head. I've been the only receptionist this week. Perhaps you met another guest? What about room 44? The people staying there? Room 44? She looked confused, then checked her computer. We don't have a room 44. Our building only has 3 floors. As I stumbled out onto the cobblestone street, I looked back at the building. I counted the floors, 1, 2, 3. No 4th floor. Yet I had climbed those stairs, stayed in that room. I pulled out my phone to show her my booking confirmation, but it had disappeared from my email. When I checked my bank statement, there was no charge from Moonlight Hostel. Later that day, at a cafe across town, I searched online for the hostel. It existed with the same address, but with a completely different name and appearance. And in the photos, no matter how I counted, there were only ever 3 floors. I never saw Gabriel again. Sometimes I wonder if he made it out at all. The quiet hallway. It was supposed to be my dream vacation. 2 weeks backpacking through Thailand, experiencing the vibrant street life of Bangkok before heading south to the islands. I'd saved for months, meticulously planned every detail. The hostel in Bangkok's Khao San Road was highly rated online. Clean, affordable, and perfectly situated in the backpackers district. I arrived late, the taxi dropping me off around 11 p.m. after my delayed flight. The night air was thick with humidity as I dragged my backpack through the hostel's front entrance. The reception area was dimly lit, with just one staff member, a young Thai man named Siam, dozing behind the desk. "Sorry to wake you," I said softly. He jolted upright, quickly composing himself. "No problem. You must be Thomas?" he asked, his accent thick but understandable. I nodded, handing over my passport. As he processed my check-in, I noticed how eerily quiet the hostel was for a place located on one of Bangkok's busiest streets. "Not many guests tonight?" I asked casually. Siam's eyes flickered up to meet mine, then quickly back down to his computer. "4th floor not so popular right now," he said quietly. "I give you good room on 2nd floor instead." I didn't think much of it as he handed me my key card. Room 206, down the hallway to the right. The stairwell was narrow, the walls painted a faded yellow that looked almost sickly under the fluorescent lighting. My room was basic but clean. A single bed, a small desk, and a tiny bathroom with a shower that barely fit my frame. Exhausted from the 20-hour journey, I collapsed onto the bed without unpacking and immediately fell asleep. I woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed red in the darkness. Something had disturbed my sleep. A sound? I lay perfectly still, listening. There it was again. Footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate, then stopping, right outside my room. I told myself it was just another guest returning late from Bangkok's infamous nightlife. But the footsteps weren't moving past my door, they were standing still. Then came a soft scratching sound against the wood. Not knocking, scratching, like fingernails being dragged slowly down the surface. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched the door handle move slightly, testing if it was locked. Thank God I'd remembered to slide the security chain in place. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. I lay awake until sunrise, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. At breakfast, I casually asked a British couple if they'd heard anything strange during the night. They exchanged glances. "We requested a room change this morning," the woman, Isla, said in a hushed voice. "We were originally on the 4th floor, but..." She trailed off. "But what?" I pressed. Her partner, George, leaned in. "The 4th floor is bloody creepy, mate. We kept hearing children laughing in the hallway at odd hours. When we looked, nobody was there." I felt a chill despite the Bangkok heat. "Did anyone tell you why the 4th floor isn't popular?" Isla shook her head. "The staff gets weird when you mention it, but we met an Australian guy yesterday who told us a story. Said about 6 months ago, a young American traveler, Noah I think his name was found dead in room 407. Official cause was suicide, but there were rumors," George continued. "Some say he'd been dabbling in local black magic, trying to communicate with spirits at some temple. Others say he brought something back with him to the hostel. I laughed nervously. You don't actually believe that, right? They didn't answer directly. Instead, Isla said, "We're checking out today. Found a hotel near the river instead." I considered following their lead, but my budget was tight. Besides, I was on the second floor, not the fourth. Whatever weird vibes they'd felt upstairs had nothing to do with me. That night, I returned late after exploring the city. The hallway to my room seemed longer than I remembered, the shadows deeper. As I approached my door, I noticed something odd, a faint, dark stain on the carpet that hadn't been there before. It trailed from the stairwell to my door, like someone had dragged something wet across the floor. Inside my room, everything looked normal, but it felt different. Colder. I checked the air conditioning, it was off. Yet my breath formed small clouds in the air. I tried to distract myself by organizing my backpack for tomorrow's temple visits. That's when I noticed something missing. A small wooden amulet I'd purchased earlier that day from an old woman near the Grand Palace. She'd insisted it would protect me, pressing it into my palm with surprising strength. Now it was gone. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Around 2 a.m., I was still staring at the ceiling when the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, not even the ambient light from outside penetrating the blackness. Then I heard it, the same footsteps from the previous night. Slow, deliberate, stopping outside my door. But this time, something else followed, the sound of a child's laughter. High-pitched and innocent, yet somehow deeply wrong in the silence of the hostel hallway. The scratching at my door began again, more insistent this time. The door handle jiggled violently. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice betraying my fear. The laughter stopped abruptly. Then a child's voice, speaking Thai in a sing-song manner. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone made my skin crawl. It didn't sound right, like an adult trying to imitate a child. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the door, and froze as I saw shadows moving in the gap beneath it. Not one shadow, but many, like fingers reaching inward. Something slid under the door. My missing amulet, now cracked down the middle. I didn't sleep that night. At first light, I packed my bags and headed downstairs, determined to check out. At reception, a different staff member, a young woman named Clara, was working. "I need to leave," I said, placing my key card on the counter. "Family emergency." Clara looked at me, concern in her eyes. "Is everything okay, sir? You look like you haven't slept." I hesitated, then decided to ask. "What happened on the fourth floor? Why is it empty?" Her expression hardened. "Who told you it was empty?" "No one, I just assumed." "Fourth floor is fully booked," she interrupted. "Has been for weeks." My blood ran cold. "But I haven't seen anyone." "You're in room 206, yes?" she asked, checking her computer. I nodded. "That's strange," she said, frowning at the screen. "According to our system, you were checked into room 407 2 days ago." I felt the room spinning around me. "That's impossible. I've been in 206 since I arrived." Clara's eyes widened as she looked at something behind me. I turned to follow her gaze. On the security monitor showing the fourth floor hallway, a figure stood outside room 407. My figure, still as a statue, staring directly at the camera. I never did check out properly. I ran from that hostel with my backpack half-zipped, leaving behind my deposit and my sanity. Later, I learned from other travelers that 6 months earlier, not one but 3 guests had died in that hostel, an American named Noah, a British girl named Isla, and a Canadian named Thomas. My name is Thomas. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a window or mirror, I see myself standing in that fourth floor hallway, scratching at a door, waiting to be let in. My screams echoed through the hostel, but no one came. No one ever comes in Hostel Amazonia when the whispers start. Let me tell you how I ended up here, so you never make my mistake. I'm Felix Weber, a 28-year-old photographer from Berlin. 3 weeks ago, I arrived in Manaus, Brazil, that impossible city carved from the heart of the Amazon rainforest. I'd come for the famed meeting of waters, where the black Rio Negro joins the sandy-colored Amazon without mixing, creating a two-toned river that stretches for kilometers. You must stay at Hostel Amazonia, my guidebook raved. Authentic jungle experience just 10 minutes from downtown. Authentic was an understatement. The hostel stood on stilts at the edge of the rainforest, a ramshackle 3-story wooden structure with a view of the river. The lobby walls were adorned with tribal masks and dried piranha. A ceiling fan pushed around hot, humid air that smelled of mold and something metallic I couldn't identify. The receptionist, a local girl who introduced herself as Ira, seemed oddly relieved to see me. "We haven't had guests in the East Wing for weeks," she said, handing me a rusted key attached to a wooden monkey carving. "Room 27. Last one on the right before the bridge to the old section." Old section? Closed for renovation. Her eyes darted to the window, where dusk was rapidly approaching. "Don't go there, especially after dark. The boards are rotted through." I lugged my backpack up creaking stairs, passing empty room after empty room. For a top-rated hostel, Amazonia was strangely deserted. Room 27 was Spartan, a sagging mattress on a metal frame, a desk, and a ceiling fan missing one blade, causing it to wobble unevenly. The bathroom was shared down the hall. But the balcony offered a spectacular view of the meeting of waters in the distance, and at only $15 a night, I couldn't complain. What caught my attention was the door at the far end of my corridor. Unlike the numbered room doors, this one was wider, darker, with faded indigenous symbols carved into its frame. A faded sign in Portuguese and English warned, "Do not enter. Danger." Beyond it, a wooden footbridge led to the shadowed outline of what I assumed was the old section, a wing extending deeper into the jungle. After settling in, I headed to the common area, hoping to meet fellow travelers. I found only one, Alessia, an Italian medical student who spoke English with a musical accent. "Have you noticed anything odd about this place?" I asked after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Alessia leaned closer. "The whispers, you mean?" I thought I was imagining them. My skin prickled. "What whispers?" "At night. From the old wing. Like 100 people talking all at once, but so softly you can't make out the words." She twisted her silver necklace nervously. "And there's something in the water." Before I could press further, Ira appeared with 2 glasses of a cloudy liquid. "House specialty," she announced. "A sigh with traditional herbs. Helps you sleep deeply." That night, I dreamt of the river. In my dream, I stood at the point where the waters met, but instead of flowing side by side, they were swirling together into a whirlpool. From its center rose faces, hundreds of them, mouths open in silent screams. I woke to scratching at my door. Not knocking, scratching, like fingernails dragging slowly down the wood. "Who's there?" I called. The scratching stopped, replaced by whispering, exactly as Alessia had described. Not one voice but many, speaking in Portuguese, English, German, and languages I couldn't identify. I couldn't distinguish words, just the urgent, desperate tone. My phone showed 3:17 a.m. Against all horror movie logic, I got up and approached the door. The peephole showed an empty corridor. I opened the door. Nothing. But the prohibited door at the end of the hall, the one leading to the old wing, now stood ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. Someone shuffled across the corridor, entering the bathroom. Through the gap in the door, I glimpsed Alessia's distinctive copper hair. "Alessia?" I called softly. "Did you hear that too?" No answer, but water began running in the sink. I returned to bed, blaming overactive imagination and jet lag. But sleep wouldn't come. The whispers continued, now seeming to come from the walls themselves. and beneath them a wet, rhythmic sound, like something heavy being dragged through mud. Morning brought no sign of Alessia at breakfast. When I asked Iera, she looked confused. "No Italian girl is registered," she insisted. "You are our only guest this week." "But I talked to her yesterday. Right here in this room." Iera's expression hardened. "Perhaps you dreamt it. The jungle plays tricks on foreign minds." That afternoon, I visited the famous Teatro Amazonas, the opulent rubber-boom opera house in the middle of the jungle. As I photographed its ornate ceiling, a tour guide described how thousands of indigenous workers had died building Manaus during the rubber boom. "The city is built on bones," he said matter-of-factly. "And the river remembers." Back at the hostel, I found my room door unlocked. Inside, the floor was wet. Muddy footprints led from the balcony to my bed, where something sat waiting. A silver necklace. Alessia's necklace. I confronted Iera, who finally broke. "Every rainy season, when the river rises, they come," she whispered. "Those who drowned. Those whose bodies were never found. They seek warmth. They seek voices. They seek passengers." What happened to Alessia? She went to the old wing. They always do, eventually. That night, I barricaded my door with the desk and chair. I planned to check out at first light. But at midnight, my balcony door, which I'd locked, swung open. Standing there, dripping river water that steamed slightly in the cool air, was Alessia. Her skin had a grayish tinge, her eyes clouded like cataracts. "Felix," she said, her voice overlaid with others. "You must see what we found." Behind her stood more figures, shadowy, waterlogged, their features indistinct except for their eyes, which glowed faintly in the darkness. "The old wing isn't empty," Alessia continued, extending a dripping hand. "It's full. So full. But there's room for you." I ran, not to the door, which I somehow knew would be blocked, but to the bathroom, locking myself inside. The whispers grew deafening. Water began seeping under the door, rising quickly around my ankles. It wasn't water. It was too warm, too thick. It smelled of iron and rot. The river was coming for me. Through the tiny bathroom window, I could see the meeting of waters in the moonlight. But now I understood what Alessia meant. There was something in the water. Faces. Hundreds of faces just below the surface, all turned toward the hostel. Toward me. The liquid reached my knees, then my waist. The ceiling fans wobbling grew violent, then stopped altogether as the power died. In the darkness, I felt cold, wet hands touch my shoulders, my face. "Join us," the whispers urged. "The river is hungry. It needs a voice like yours." As the water closed over my head, I made my choice. I'm still at Hostel Amazonia. We all are. When you visit Manaus and stay in room 27, I'll be the whisper in the walls. I'll be the scratch at your door at 3:17 a.m. And when you see the face in the meeting of waters, just below the surface, where the rivers join but never mix, remember, it isn't a reflection. It's an invitation. I've stopped traveling alone after what happened at the Wanderlust Hostel in Chicago last summer. I was visiting for a photography workshop and booked the cheapest accommodation I could find, a decent-looking hostel near Millennium Park. The lobby was warm and inviting, with the receptionist, Noah, greeting me with a smile as I approached. "Checking in," he asked, fingers tapping at the keyboard. "Matthew Johnson. 5 nights." Noah's fingers stopped abruptly. Something? Concern? Fear? Crossed his face. "I see you're booked for room 413. He lowered his voice. "It's our last room on the top floor. Some guests find it a bit isolated." I laughed. "Perfect. I'm a light sleeper." He handed me the key card, his fingers lingering too long. "If you need anything at all, the front desk is staffed 24/7. Room 413 was at the end of a long, neglected hallway with worn carpet and flickering lights. I noticed something odd. rooms 410, 411, 412, then 413, but on the opposite side, only 2 doors, 414 and 415. The numbering made no sense. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. I attended my workshop, explored the city, and only returned to sleep. I barely noticed the eerie silence of the 4th floor or the temperature drop near my room. On the 3rd night, everything changed. I returned around 10 p.m., exhausted. The night receptionist, Olivia, smiled as I walked past, but her smile faltered when she saw which key card I held. "Enjoying your stay in 413?" she asked, her voice strangely tight. "Yeah, it's fine. Why does everyone keep asking about that room?" Her eyes darted to the stairwell. "No reason. Just making conversation." As I approached my room, I noticed water seeping under the door. Confused, I entered to find everything dry, no sign of any leak. I collapsed into bed. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it, soft, rhythmic tapping from the wall behind me. Tap, tap, tap. Fuzz. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was pipes or another guest. But the tapping had a deliberate quality. This wasn't random noise. It felt like communication. I pressed my ear against the wall. The tapping stopped immediately. Then, just as I was about to pull away, I heard a voice, faint but distinct. "Help me." I jerked back, heart racing. The voice had been clear, a girl's voice, desperate. It was 3:17 a.m. As I paced, movement in the alley below caught my eye. A figure stood directly beneath my window, a young woman in a white nightgown, pale face framed by dark hair. Our eyes met. She raised one hand, pointing not at me but at something behind me. I spun around. Nothing. When I looked back, she was gone. The next morning, I confronted Noah. "What's the story with room 413? I heard things last night. Tapping. A voice asking for help." Noah paled visibly. Every old building has quirks. Wanderlust used to be a boarding house in the 1920s. "Cut the bullshit," I interrupted. "There's something you're not telling me." After a pause, Noah sighed. "Talk to Elijah. He's worked here longer than anyone. He'll be in tomorrow." I spent the entire day away, returning after midnight. This time, I left the lights off and waited. Hours passed. Just as I was thinking I'd imagined everything, the tapping started. Tap, tap, tap. I pressed my ear against the wall. "Please help me. I'm in the last room," the voice said, clearer now. "Who are you?" I whispered. No response. Just more urgent tapping. Then I remembered the strange numbering. If there were only rooms 414 and 415 across from 410 to 413, where was room 416? Could that be the last room? I opened my door and peered down the darkened hallway. The flickering light had gone out completely. But there, at the very end, past room 415, I could make out another door, one I hadn't noticed before. As I moved toward it, the air grew frigid, my breath fogging despite it being July. The carpet felt damp, squelching with each step. When I reached the door, I saw faded numbers, 416. The wood was older, darker, with gouges around the lock as if someone had tried to claw their way out. I heard nothing at first. Then a hand slammed against the other side, directly in line with my face. I jumped back, stifling a scream. "Please," came the voice. "She won't let me leave." My hands shook as I tried the handle. But I was about to run for my phone when I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate steps coming up. A tall figure emerged. In the darkness, I could only make out a silhouette, but I knew immediately it wasn't human. The shape was wrong, too angular, too still. "Isabella doesn't want visitors," a hollow voice echoed. "She's been very naughty." I ran, taking the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. I burst into the lobby, startling Olivia. "Room 416. I gasped. "There's someone locked in room 416. "Sir," she responded, face draining of color, There is no room 416. There never has been. When I spoke to Elijah the next morning, his explanation chilled me. In 1924, a young woman named Isabella disappeared from the Eastwood boarding house for young women, he said quietly. She was last seen entering her room, 416, but when police broke down the door, the room was empty except for a puddle of water. The case was never solved. I left Chicago that day. Later, I researched the old boarding house and found newspaper clippings confirming Elijah's story. I also found a photograph of the residence in 1924. In the back row stood a girl with dark hair and a white dress. The same girl from the alley. I still have nightmares about that hostel. In them, I'm always walking toward room 416, knowing what waits behind the door but unable to turn back. And sometimes, when I wake in the night, I swear I can hear it, tap tap tap, coming from inside my walls. And I wonder, did I ever really leave the last room?